I remember that day like it was yesterday. It was a warm Tuesday afternoon in June when my phone buzzed with a message from my sister, Sarah. Hey, big news. Mom and Dad want to treat us all to dinner at La Maison Dorée this Saturday. You in? I couldn't believe it. La Maison Dorée was the fanciest restaurant in our little town of Millbrook, the kind of place where people went to celebrate anniversaries or pop the big question. I'd never been there myself, always feeling like it was a bit out of my league. But now, here was an invitation to dine at the creme de la creme of local establishments, and with my family no less. I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness bubble up inside me. Count me in. I texted back, my fingers trembling slightly as I hit send. The next few days passed in a blur of anticipation. I found myself daydreaming at work, imagining the elegant table settings and the mouth-watering dishes I'd seen on their website. My coworker, Tom, must have noticed my distraction because he kept asking if I was feeling all right. Just excited about a family dinner, I'd say, trying to play it cool. But inside, I was anything but cool. As Saturday approached, I faced the age-old dilemma: what to wear. I stood in front of my closet, scrutinizing every item of clothing I owned. Nothing seemed quite right. Too casual, too formal, too old, too new. In a moment of desperation, I even considered calling my ex-girlfriend, Lisa, to ask for fashion advice. Thankfully, common sense prevailed, and I settled on a navy blue blazer, a crisp white shirt, and my good jeans, the ones without any holes or paint stains. When Saturday finally arrived, I spent an embarrassingly long time getting ready. I showered twice, just to be sure. I polished my shoes until I could see my reflection in them. I even attempted to style my usually unruly hair, though it stubbornly refused to cooperate. By the time I was done, I looked, well, as good as I was going to get. The drive to La Maison Dorée felt both endless and far too short. My palms were sweaty on the steering wheel, and I kept checking my reflection in the rearview mirror, half expecting to find a giant zit had sprouted on my nose in the last 5 minutes. As I pulled into the parking lot, I saw my parents' car already there. Always punctual, those two. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of my car and walked towards the entrance. The restaurant stood before me, all glass and polished wood, with soft golden light spilling out onto the sidewalk. A doorman in an impeccable uniform opened the door for me with a polite nod. "Good evening, sir," he said, and I felt a little thrill at being called sir. As I stepped inside, the atmosphere enveloped me like a warm blanket. The soft strains of classical music, was that Vivaldi? Filled the air, mingling with the quiet murmur of conversation and the occasional clink of silverware against fine china. The lighting was low and intimate, creating little pools of warmth around each table. The smell was incredible, a mix of savory and sweet that made my mouth water instantly. I spotted my family at a table near the back. Mom waved enthusiastically when she saw me, while Dad gave me a nod and a smile. My sister Sarah was there with her husband, Mike, and my younger brother, Tim, was fiddling with his phone as usual. As I made my way over to them, weaving between the tables, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Look at us, I thought, all dressed up and dining at the fanciest place in town. There he is, Mom said as I reached the table, standing up to give me a hug. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, and her hair was done up in an elegant style. Dad stood up too, shaking my hand firmly. "Glad you could make it, son," he said, and I detected a note of something in his voice. Nervousness? Excitement? It was hard to tell. I took my seat between Tim and Sarah, feeling a bit like a kid again, surrounded by my family. The table was a work of art, crisp white tablecloth, gleaming silverware, and delicate china plates. In the center was a small arrangement of fresh flowers that looked like they cost more than my weekly grocery budget. A waiter appeared almost immediately, handing me a menu bound in soft leather. "Good evening," he said smoothly. "May I offer you something to drink?" I glanced at the others. They all had glasses of what looked like champagne. "I'll have what they're having," I said, trying to sound confident. As the waiter glided away, Sarah leaned over to me. "Isn't this place amazing?" she whispered. "I feel like I'm in a movie or something." I nodded in agreement, still taking it all in. The other diners around us looked like they belonged here, men in tailored suits, women dripping in jewelry. I felt a little out of place, but the excitement of the evening overrode any discomfort. The champagne arrived, and Dad raised his glass in a toast. To family, he said, his voice carrying a weight that seemed out of proportion to the simple words. We all clinked glasses, the crystal ringing out clearly. The champagne was crisp and bubbly, dancing on my tongue. I'd never tasted anything like it. As we perused the menus, I couldn't help but notice the lack of prices. That old saying came to mind, if you have to ask, you can't afford it. I wondered briefly how much this meal was going to set my parents back, but pushed the thought aside. This was a celebration, after all. Of what, I wasn't quite sure, but it felt important. The conversation flowed as easily as the champagne. We caught up on each other's lives, Sarah's new promotion, Tim's latest girlfriend, Mom's garden club drama. It felt good to be together like this, away from the usual distractions of TV and phones, though Tim still snuck glances at his every now and then. When it came time to order, I felt a moment of panic. The menu was full of dishes I couldn't pronounce, let alone identify. Foie gras, escargot, bouillabaisse. It was like reading a foreign language. In the end, I chose something that sounded vaguely familiar, beef Wellington. Excellent choice, sir, the waiter said, and I felt a little surge of pride. As we waited for our food, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about the evening. Don't get me wrong, everything was perfect. The setting, the company, the champagne that kept magically refilling in my glass. But there was an undercurrent of tension that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I caught Mom and Dad exchanging glances a few times, the kind of wordless communication that only comes from decades of marriage. Sarah seemed overly cheerful, her laugh a little too loud, her smiles a little too bright. Even Tim had put his phone away, which was practically unheard of. But before I could dwell on it too much, the food arrived. And oh, what food it was. My beef Wellington was a work of art, the pastry golden and flaky, the meat perfectly cooked. Everyone's dishes looked equally impressive. Sarah's lobster was arranged like a sculpture, and the steam rising from Dad's soup created a little halo around his plate. We fell into a comfortable silence as we ate, broken only by the occasional or, "This is incredible." I savored every bite, trying to commit the flavors to memory. This was the kind of meal you told your grandkids about, I thought. As we finished our main courses and the plates were whisked away, that undercurrent of tension seemed to resurface. Dad cleared his throat, setting down his napkin with a deliberate motion. "Well," he said, "I suppose you're all wondering why we're here." And just like that, the bubble of the evening burst. The background noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away as we all focused on Dad. Mom reached out and took his hand, giving him an encouraging nod. "We have some news," Dad continued, his voice steady but with an edge of, what? Excitement? Nervousness? "Your mother and we've been thinking about this for a long time, and we've decided." He paused, and in that moment, 1,000 possibilities raced through my mind. Were they moving? Retiring? Getting a divorce? The suspense was killing me. "We've decided to sell the house and travel the world." The words hung in the air like the chandelier above us, glittering, beautiful, and slightly overwhelming. I blinked, trying to process what I'd just heard. Sell the house? The house I'd grown up in, the house that had been in our family for generations? I looked around the table, gauging everyone's reactions. Sarah's mouth was hanging open in shock. Tim had his phone out again, but he wasn't looking at it. His eyes were fixed on Dad, wide with disbelief. Mike, Sarah's husband, was nodding slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. "But why?" I finally managed to ask, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Mom jumped in then, her eyes shining with excitement. "We've always talked about seeing the world," she said. "And now, with you kids all grown up and doing so well, we thought, why not? Life's too short to keep putting off our dreams." I sat back in my chair, my mind reeling. On one level, I was happy for them. They deserved to live out their dreams, to have adventures and see new places. But on another level, a more selfish level, I felt a pang of loss. The house had always been there, a constant in our lives. The idea of it belonging to someone else felt wrong somehow. "What about holidays?" Sarah asked, her voice small. "Where will we all gather for Christmas?" Dad smiled, reaching out to pat her hand. "We'll figure it out," he said. "Maybe we'll rent a big house somewhere new each year. Think of it as an adventure for all of us." As the shock began to wear off, questions started pouring out. When were they leaving? Where would they go first? What about all our childhood stuff still in the attic? Mom and Dad answered patiently, filling in the details of their grand plan. They'd been planning this for months, it turned out. The house wasn't on the market yet, but they had an agent lined up. They were thinking of starting in Europe, Paris, Rome, Barcelona. Then maybe Asia, South America, wherever the wind took them. As they talked, I found myself getting caught up in their enthusiasm. I could picture them strolling hand in hand down the Champs-Élysées or watching the sunset over the Taj Mahal. They looked younger somehow, more vibrant, as they described their plans. The waiter appeared again, this time with dessert menus, but we waved him away. Somehow, creme brulee and chocolate soufflé seemed unimportant in the face of this life-changing news. As the evening wound down and we prepared to leave, I found myself looking at my family with new eyes. Mom and Dad, not just as parents, but as individuals with dreams and aspirations. Sarah and Tim, my siblings, grown-ups with lives of their own. We were all changing, evolving, and maybe that was okay. We stepped out into the cool night air, the stars twinkling overhead. The valet brought our cars around, and we stood there for a moment, reluctant to part ways. There was a sense that something fundamental had shifted, that we were standing on the threshold of a new chapter in our family story. Dad pulled us all in for a group hug, something he hadn't done since we were kids. "We love you all," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "This isn't an ending, it's a beginning." For all of us. As I drove home that night, my mind was buzzing with everything that had happened. The elegant dinner, the shocking news, the mixed emotions. But underneath it all was a sense of excitement, of possibility. Our family was changing, yes, but maybe change wasn't such a bad thing after all. I fell asleep that night dreaming of faraway places and new adventures. And somewhere in those dreams, I saw our family, scattered across the globe, but still connected, still strong. It was a comforting thought, and I held on to it as I drifted off into a deep, peaceful sleep. The days following that fateful dinner at La Maison Dorée were a whirlwind of emotions and activity. My parents' announcement about selling the house and traveling the world had turned our lives upside down. But life, as they say, goes on, and before I knew it, another family gathering was upon us. This time, it was my turn to host. I'd recently moved into a new apartment in the heart of downtown Millbrook, and I was eager to show it off to my family. It wasn't anything fancy like La Maison Dorée, but it was mine, and I was proud of it. I spent the entire day cleaning and preparing. I wanted everything to be perfect. I even bought a new set of plates from the local department store, determined to create an atmosphere that was at least a little bit special. As I set the table, I couldn't help but think about how different this dinner would be from our last family meal. The doorbell rang at precisely 7 p.m. Leave it to my parents to be punctual, even when their world was in flux. I opened the door to find Mom and Dad standing there, both looking a bit more relaxed than usual. Mom was holding a bouquet of flowers, and Dad had a bottle of wine tucked under his arm. "Oh, honey, the place looks wonderful," Mom exclaimed as she stepped inside, her eyes roving over every detail of my modest apartment. She handed me the flowers with a warm smile. "These are for you. A little housewarming gift." Dad clapped me on the shoulder as he passed, nodding approvingly. "Nice digs, son," he said, using a slang term that sounded oddly out of place coming from him. I wondered if this was part of their new world traveler persona. Sarah and Mike arrived a few minutes later, with Tim trailing behind them, his eyes glued to his phone as usual. As everyone settled in, I couldn't help but notice how different the atmosphere was from our dinner at La Maison Dorée. Here, in the cozy confines of my apartment, everyone seemed more relaxed, more themselves. "So, what's on the menu?" Tim asked, finally looking up from his phone. Please tell me it's not escargot or whatever that fancy stuff was last time. I laughed, feeling some of the tension ease out of my shoulders. No worries, bro. I kept it simple. Homemade lasagna, garlic bread, and a big salad. Oh, and I attempted to make tiramisu for dessert, but no promises on how that turned out. Sounds perfect, Sarah said, smiling. She looked around the room, her eyes lingering on the family photos I'd put up on the walls. I love what you've done with the place. It feels like you. We gathered around the table, which was a bit cramped in my small dining area, but somehow that made it feel more intimate. Dad opened the wine he'd brought, pouring generous glasses for everyone except Tim, who was still a few months shy of the legal drinking age and had to make do with soda. As I brought out the lasagna, steam rising invitingly from the dish, I felt a surge of pride. It might not be beef Wellington or lobster, but it was made with love, and judging by the appreciative noises from my family, it tasted pretty good too. This is delicious, sweetheart, Mom said, taking a big bite. You'll have to give me the recipe before we leave. And just like that, the elephant in the room made its presence known. Their upcoming departure, the sale of our childhood home, the big changes on the horizon, it all came rushing back. So, I said, trying to keep my voice casual, how are the travel plans coming along? Decided where you're going to start. Dad put down his fork, a gleam in his eye. Well, we've been doing some research, he began, and I could tell he was excited to share. We're thinking of starting in Europe. Paris, Rome, maybe a tour through the countryside of Tuscany. Ooh, Tuscany. Sarah chimed in. I've always wanted to go there. The wine, the rolling hills, the charming little villages. You should come visit us, Mom said, her face lighting up. All of you. We could rent a villa, make a family vacation out of it. The idea hung in the air, tantalizing and a little bit scary. A family vacation in Tuscany? It sounded like something out of a movie, not our real lives. That sounds amazing, I said slowly, trying to wrap my head around the idea. But what about work? And the cost? I mean, a villa in Tuscany can't be cheap. Don't worry about the cost, Dad said, waving his hand dismissively. Consider it our treat. As for work, well, that's what vacation days are for, right? We're not getting any younger, kids. It's time we start making some memories together, outside of Millbrook. I looked around the table, gauging everyone's reactions. Sarah and Mike were nodding enthusiastically, already looking like they were mentally packing their bags. Tim had put down his phone, a miracle in itself, and was actually paying attention to the conversation. Even he looked intrigued by the idea. As for me, I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. On one hand, a family vacation in Tuscany sounded incredible. On the other hand, it was so far outside of my comfort zone, so different from anything we'd ever done as a family before. I don't know, I said hesitantly. It's a big step. And what about the house? Don't you need to be here to deal with the sale and everything? Mom reached across the table, patting my hand gently. Sweetie, we've got it all figured out. The realtor is handling most of it, and we're not planning to leave until after the sale is finalized. There's no need to worry. I nodded, trying to push down the knot of anxiety in my stomach. It wasn't just about the logistics, though. The idea of my parents gallivanting around the world, of our childhood home being sold to strangers, of everything changing so quickly, it was a lot to process. Hey, Sarah said, noticing my discomfort. Remember when we were kids, and we used to play Explorer in the backyard? We'd pretend the swing set was a ship, and we were sailing to distant lands. This is kind of like that, isn't it? Just for real this time. Her words hit home, stirring up memories of carefree summer days, of imagination and adventure. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was just a grown-up version of those childhood games. Yeah, Tim piped up, surprising us all. And think about all the cool stuff we'll get to see. The Colosseum, the Eiffel Tower, all those places we've only seen in books or movies. I couldn't help but smile at their enthusiasm. I guess when you put it that way, it does sound pretty amazing, I admitted. The conversation flowed more easily after that, with everyone chipping in ideas for the trip. Mom talked about the art museums she wanted to visit, while Dad was more interested in trying out all the local cuisines. Sarah and Mike were already planning hikes through the Tuscan countryside, and even Tim seemed excited about the prospect of seeing some of Europe's famous football stadiums. As I listened to their chatter, I felt something shift inside me. The anxiety was still there, but it was being overshadowed by a growing sense of excitement. This wasn't just about my parents selling the house and traveling. This was about our whole family embarking on a new adventure together. The lasagna was long gone by this point, and we'd moved on to the tiramisu, which had turned out better than I'd expected. As we savored the rich, coffee-flavored dessert, I found myself really looking at my family. Mom and Dad, their faces animated as they talked about their travel plans, looking younger and more vibrant than I'd seen them in years. Sarah and Mike, leaning into each other, clearly excited about the prospect of exploring a new place together. And Tim, usually so absorbed in his digital world, now fully engaged in the conversation, his eyes bright with anticipation. And me? I realized I was smiling, really smiling, for the first time since that dinner at La Maison Dorée. Yes, things were changing. Yes, it was scary. But maybe, just maybe, it was also exciting. Okay, I said, cutting through the chatter. Everyone turned to look at me. I'm in. Let's do this. Let's go to Tuscany. The words were barely out of my mouth before I was engulfed in a group hug, everyone. Talking at once, laughing and cheering. In that moment, squeezed between my siblings and parents in my tiny apartment, I felt a surge of love for my family so strong it almost took my breath away. As the evening wound down and everyone prepared to leave, there was a palpable sense of excitement in the air. Plans were made to meet again soon to start organizing the trip. Hugs were exchanged, goodbyes were said, and promises to stay in touch were made. After the last person had left and I was alone in my apartment, I stood for a moment, taking it all in. The dirty dishes in the sink, the half-empty wine glasses on the table, the lingering smell of garlic and tomato sauce, all evidence of a family dinner, but one so different from any we'd had before. I walked over to the window, looking out at the twinkling lights of downtown Millbrook. It struck me then that this view, this apartment, this life I'd built for myself, it was all part of my own adventure. And now, that adventure was about to get a whole lot bigger. As I started cleaning up, humming softly to myself, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Yes, everything was changing. Our family dynamics, our home, our future, it was all up in the air. But standing there in my kitchen, with the warm glow of the evening still surrounding me, I realized something important. Change didn't have to be scary. It could be exciting, invigorating, full of possibility. And facing that change together as a family made it all the more special. I went to bed that night with a smile on my face, dreaming of rolling Tuscan hills, glasses of rich red wine, and the sound of my family's laughter echoing through the warm Italian air. Whatever came next, we would face it together. And honestly, I couldn't wait. The weeks flew by in a flurry of activity. Between work, helping my parents sort through decades of accumulated belongings, and planning our Tuscan adventure, I barely had time to catch my breath. Before I knew it, the day of our departure had arrived. We'd all agreed to meet at my parents' house, soon to be their former house, for one last family breakfast before heading to the airport. As I pulled into the driveway, a lump formed in my throat. This place had been our anchor for so long, and now we were about to set sail into uncharted waters. The smell of coffee and pancakes greeted me as I walked in. Mom was at the stove, flipping pancakes with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. Dad was fussing with the coffee maker, muttering something about Italian espresso. Sarah and Mike were already at the table, poring over a guidebook, while Tim was, predictably, glued to his phone. "Morning, everyone," I called out, setting down the bag of fresh berries I'd brought. A chorus of greetings answered me, and just like that, I was enveloped in the familiar warmth of family. As we sat down to eat, the conversation flowed easily. We talked about our itinerary, the villa we'd rented, the places we wanted to see. There was an undercurrent of excitement running through it all, a shared anticipation of the adventure ahead. I can't believe we're really doing this, Sarah said, a touch of wonder in her voice. I mean, a family vacation in Tuscany? It's like something out of a movie. Yeah, who would have thought? I agreed, reaching for another pancake. A few months ago, we were just having a regular dinner at La Maison Dorée, and now look at us. Speaking of which, Tim piped up, a mischievous glint in his eye. Who's footing the bill for this little adventure? I mean, villas in Tuscany don't come cheap, right? There was a moment of awkward silence. We all knew that our parents were covering most of the expenses, but it felt a bit gauche to discuss it openly. Mom cleared her throat. Well, your father and I— Oh, come on, Sarah interrupted, her tone light but with an edge to it. We all know it's coming out of the house money. Right, bro? She turned to me, her smile a little too sharp. I mean, you're the one with the big fancy job. You're probably chipping in the most, aren't you? I felt my face grow hot. It was true that I'd offered to contribute more than the others. I could afford it, after all, but I hadn't wanted to make a big deal out of it. Yeah, Sarah continued, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Our big brother, always ready to save the day. You only serve to pay for things, haha. The words hung in the air, heavy and ugly. I felt like I'd been slapped. The excited chatter of moments ago was replaced by a tense silence, broken only by the soft clink of cutlery against plates. I looked around the table, trying to gauge everyone's reactions. Mom looked mortified, her hand covering her mouth. Dad was frowning, his brow furrowed in concern. Mike was studiously examining his plate, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Tim had actually put down his phone, his eyes wide with surprise. And Sarah was still smiling that brittle smile, but there was something else in her eyes now. Regret? Defiance? I couldn't tell. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Hurt, anger, embarrassment, they all fought for dominance. Part of me wanted to lash out, to throw Sarah's words back in her face. Another part wanted to get up and leave, to forget this whole Tuscan adventure and go back to my safe, predictable life. But as I looked around at my family, my well-meaning but sometimes clueless parents, my sharp-tongued but ultimately loving sister, my tech-obsessed but good-hearted brother, I realized something. This moment, as painful as it was part of our journey too. It wasn't all going to be picture-perfect sunsets and glasses of Chianti. There would be bumps along the way, old grievances surfacing, new tensions arising. So instead of reacting, I took another deep breath. And then, surprising even myself, I smiled. Not a happy smile, not really, but a smile of understanding, of acceptance. You're right, Sarah, I said, my voice calm despite the turmoil inside. I am paying for a lot of this trip. And you know what? I'm glad I can. I'm glad I can contribute to this family adventure. Because that's what family does. We support each other in whatever way we can. Sarah's smile faltered, her eyes widening in surprise. She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand, not quite finished. But this trip isn't about money. It's not about who pays for what. It's about us, all of us, stepping out of our comfort zones and trying something new together. And if my contribution helps make that happen, then I'm happy to give it. The tension around the table began to dissipate, replaced by a mix of emotions, relief, embarrassment, and maybe a touch of admiration. Mom reached out and squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Well said, son, Dad murmured, nodding approvingly. Sarah looked down at her plate, her cheeks flushed. When she looked up again, her eyes were bright with tears. I'm sorry, she said softly. That was a really crappy thing to say. I don't know why I guess I reached across the table, taking her hand. It's okay, sis. We're all a little on edge, I think. Big changes, you know. She nodded, squeezing my hand gratefully. Yeah, but that's no excuse. I really am sorry. Group hug. Tim suddenly exclaimed, jumping up from his chair. Before anyone could protest, he'd rounded the table and thrown his arms around Sarah and me. The others quickly joined in, and soon we were all tangled together in a messy, slightly awkward, but ultimately heartwarming family embrace. As we broke apart, laughing a little self-consciously, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Yes, Sarah's words had hurt. Yes, there were probably more difficult moments ahead, but we were facing them together as a family. So, I said, picking up my fork again, who wants to bet on how many times Tim will try to take a selfie with the Leaning Tower of Pisa? And just like that, the tension was broken. We fell back into easy conversation, finishing our breakfast amid laughter and playful banter. As I helped clear the dishes, I caught Sarah's eye. She mouthed another, "I'm sorry," and I nodded, smiling to let her know it was truly okay. As we gathered our luggage and prepared to leave for the airport, I took one last look around the house. This place had seen so much: birthdays, holidays, arguments, reconciliations. It had been our safe harbor for so long. But now it was time to set sail, to see what other shores awaited us. We piled into our cars, a caravan of excitement and nervous energy. As we pulled out of the driveway, I saw Mom wipe away a tear. But she was smiling too, her hand clasped tightly in Dad's. The drive to the airport was a blur of last-minute checklist reviews and excited chatter. As we checked in and made our way through security, I felt a mix of emotions: anticipation, anxiety, and a deep, abiding love for this imperfect, sometimes messy, but always loving family of mine. Standing at the gate, waiting to board our flight to Italy, I looked around at my family. Mom and Dad, holding hands and looking both nervous and excited. Sarah and Mike, heads bent together over the guidebook again. Tim, finally looking up from his phone, his eyes wide as he watched the planes take off and land. And me? I felt ready. Ready for whatever adventures and whatever challenges lay ahead. Because no matter what happened in Tuscany or beyond, we would face it together. And really, what more could anyone ask for? As our flight was called and we began to board, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Yes, things were changing. Yes, there would be ups and downs. But as we stepped onto the plane, ready to embark on this new chapter of our lives, I knew one thing for certain. The journey ahead might not always be smooth, but with my family by my side, it would always be worth it. The plane took off, carrying us towards new horizons, new experiences, and new understandings of ourselves and each other. As I watched Millbrook disappear beneath us, I smiled. Whatever lay ahead, we were ready. Together. The flight to Italy was long, but surprisingly smooth. I spent most of it alternating between dozing off and watching the in-flight movies, trying not to dwell on Sarah's earlier comment. As we began our descent into Florence, I felt a mix of excitement and lingering unease. Stepping off the plane into the warm Tuscan air felt like entering another world. The sun was just beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Despite the jet lag, I couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. We were really here, in Italy, about to start our family adventure. Wow, Tim breathed beside me, for once not looking at his phone. It's beautiful. I nodded in agreement, taking in the rolling hills visible in the distance. Even the airport, with its terracotta roof and cypress trees lining the parking lot, seemed picturesque. We made our way through customs and collected our luggage, the process made easier by Dad's meticulous planning. He'd printed out all our documents, made copies, and even learned a few key Italian phrases. As we waited for our rental cars, I caught him practicing under his breath. Dove al bagno? Where's the bathroom? Once we had our cars, two compact Italian models that seemed impossibly small for all our luggage, we set off for our rented villa. Mom had insisted on driving one car, eager to test her skills on the wrong side of the road. I volunteered to drive the other, partly because I was curious about driving in Italy, and partly because I wasn't sure I trusted Tim's reaction time given how jet-lagged we all were. The drive to our villa was both nerve-wracking and breathtaking. The narrow, winding roads kept me on high alert, but the views were spectacular. Rolling hills covered in vineyards, ancient stone farmhouses, and picture-perfect towns perched on hillsides. It was like driving through a postcard. As we navigated the unfamiliar roads, I found myself relaxing despite the challenges. The concentration required to drive kept my mind off the lingering tension from Sarah's comment earlier. I even managed to laugh when Tim, from the back seat, let out a yelp as we rounded a particularly sharp turn. "Geez, bro," he said, clutching his seatbelt. "You trying to give us all heart attacks?" I grinned, catching his eye in the rearview mirror. "Just giving you the authentic Italian driving experience, Tim." "You're welcome." By the time we pulled up to our villa, the sun had fully set and the first stars were twinkling in the sky. The villa itself was everything we'd hoped for, a beautiful stone building with a red-tiled roof, surrounded by olive groves and with a view of the nearby town's twinkling lights. As we unloaded our luggage and explored the villa, oohing and awing over the rustic kitchen, the cozy bedrooms, and the terrace with its stunning view, I felt the last of the tension from earlier melting away. This place, this moment, felt magical. We were all exhausted from the long journey, so we decided to have a quick dinner of bread, cheese, and wine, all helpfully provided by the villa's owners, before turning in for the night. As we sat around the large wooden table on the terrace, the warm night air filled with the sound of cicadas, I looked around at my family and felt a wave of affection wash over me. Mom and Dad were sitting close together, their hands intertwined on the table as they gazed out at the view. Sarah and Mike were playfully arguing over which bottle of wine to open first. Tim was, predictably, on his phone, but he was showing Dad how to use a translation app, their heads bent together over the screen. As I watched them, I realized that maintaining a calm facade wasn't just about hiding my true feelings. It was about choosing to focus on the good moments, the love that underpinned our family despite our occasional conflicts. Yes, Sarah's comment had hurt, but here we were, together in this beautiful place, about to embark on an adventure. "Hey," I said, raising my glass. "I'd like to propose a toast." Everyone turned to look at me, conversations pausing. "To family," I said, my voice steady and warm. "To new adventures, to stepping out of our comfort zones, and to facing whatever comes next together." There was a moment of silence, and I saw emotions flicker across everyone's faces: surprise, warmth, maybe a touch of guilt from Sarah. Then, as one, they raised their glasses. "To family," they echoed, and we clinked our glasses together. As we sipped our wine, I caught Sarah's eye. She gave me a small, hesitant smile, which I returned without hesitation. It wasn't a grand gesture of reconciliation, but it was a start. The conversation flowed easily after that, our excitement about the days ahead overshadowing any lingering tension. We talked about what we wanted to see and do: the art museums in Florence, the wineries in Chianti, the medieval towers of San Gimignano. As the night wore on and yawns became more frequent, we started to head off to bed. I lingered on the terrace, soaking in the peaceful night and the unfamiliar yet enchanting landscape around us. Sarah approached me as I was about to head inside. "Hey," she said softly. "Got a minute?" I nodded, leaning against the terrace railing. "What's up?" She took a deep breath, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. I wanted to apologize again for what I said this morning. It was out of line, and I feel terrible about it." I studied her face in the dim light. She looked genuinely remorseful, her usual confidence replaced by uncertainty. "I appreciate that," I said slowly. "But can I ask, where did that come from?" "I mean, we've always teased each other, but that felt different." Sarah sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I don't know. I guess I've been feeling a bit insecure lately. You've got this great job, you're always so put together, and then you offered to pay for so much of this trip. I guess I just felt less than. And instead of dealing with that like an adult, I lashed out. It was stupid and childish, and I'm really, really sorry." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd had no idea she felt that way. "Sarah," I said, reaching out to squeeze her shoulder. "You have nothing to feel insecure about. You're amazing at what you do, you have a great relationship with Mike, and you're the one who's always been the adventurous one in the family. Remember when you backpacked through Europe after college? I was too scared to even consider something like that." She gave a watery chuckle. "Yeah, I guess. It's just, sometimes it feels like you've got it all figured out, you know." I couldn't help but laugh at that. Trust me, I don't. Not even close. I'm just better at faking it, I guess. We stood in companionable silence for a moment, looking out at the starlit Tuscan landscape. So, Sarah said finally, "Are we okay?" I turned to her, pulling her into a hug. "We're okay," I assured her. "We're family. We might drive each other crazy sometimes, but we're always okay in the end." As we headed inside to our respective rooms, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The calm facade I'd been maintaining had turned into something real, a genuine sense of tranquility and optimism about the days ahead. Lying in bed that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Italian countryside, I reflected on the day's events. It had been a roller coaster of emotions, from the tension at breakfast to the excitement of arriving in Italy to the heart-to-heart with Sarah. But as I drifted off to sleep, I realized that all of it, the good and the bad, was part of what made our family, well, our family. We weren't perfect, but we were real. We hurt each other sometimes, but we also healed together. And now here we were, in this beautiful place, ready to create new memories and strengthen our bonds. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I felt ready to face them with a genuine calm, not just a facade. Because at the end of the day, we had each other. And really, what more could I ask for? As I fell asleep, a smile played on my lips. Tomorrow was the first full day of our Tuscan adventure, and I couldn't wait to see what it would bring. With my family by my side, I knew it would be unforgettable, no matter what happened. And that thought filled me with a deep, abiding sense of peace and happiness. The next morning, I woke to the sound of birds chirping and the warm Tuscan sun streaming through my window. For a moment, I was disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings throwing me off. Then it all came rushing back. We were in Italy, on our family adventure. I made my way downstairs to find most of the family already gathered in the kitchen. Mom was at the stove, attempting to figure out the Italian coffee maker, while Dad pored over a map of the region spread out on the table. Tim, surprisingly, was helping to set the table, though he kept pausing to snap photos of the rustic kitchen with his phone. "Morning, everyone," I said, stifling a yawn. "Where are Sarah and Mike?" "Still sleeping," Mom replied, triumphantly producing a pot of coffee. "Jet lag hit them pretty hard, I think." We settled around the table, munching on fresh bread and local cheese, discussing our plans for the day. Dad was eager to visit a nearby winery, while Tim wanted to explore the medieval town we could see from our terrace. I was happy to go along with whatever the group decided. Just as we were finishing up breakfast, Sarah and Mike emerged, looking a bit groggy but excited for the day ahead. As Sarah poured herself a cup of coffee, she caught my eye and gave me a small smile. I returned it, feeling grateful for our conversation the night before. We decided to split up for the morning. Dad and Mom would go to the winery, Sarah and Mike wanted to check out a local market, and Tim and I volunteered to do a grocery run for dinner supplies. We agreed to meet back at the villa for a late lunch, and then head into town together in the afternoon. Tim and I set off in one of the rental cars, armed with a shopping list from Mom and directions to the nearest supermarket. As we wound our way down the hill from our villa, Tim turned to me. "So," he said, a bit hesitantly, "are you and Sarah really okay? After, what she said yesterday." I glanced at him, surprised. Tim wasn't usually one to bring up emotional topics. "Yeah, we're okay," I said. "We talked it out last night. It's all good." Tim nodded, looking relieved. "Cool. 'Cause, I didn't like seeing you guys fight. It felt like when we were kids, and you two would argue all the time." I chuckled at the memory. "We've grown up a bit since then, Tim. We can handle our disagreements better now." "I guess," he said, fiddling with his phone. "It's just, this trip is supposed to be fun, I don't want anything to mess it up." His words touched me. Despite his often aloof exterior, Tim clearly cared deeply about our family harmony. "Don't worry," I assured him. "Nothing's going to mess this up. We're here to have a great time together, and that's exactly what we're going to do." We arrived at the supermarket, which was an adventure in itself. Navigating the unfamiliar aisles, deciphering Italian labels, and trying to communicate with the helpful but non-English speaking staff had us in stitches. By the time we left, laden with bags of pasta, fresh vegetables, and a couple of bottles of local wine, we were both in high spirits. Back at the villa, we found the others had already returned. The kitchen was a hive of activity as we all pitched in to prepare lunch. Dad was regaling us with tales from the winery, while Sarah and Mike unpacked their finds from the market: a beautiful hand-painted ceramic bowl, some local olive oil, and a wedge of pecorino cheese that smelled divine. As we sat down to eat, I couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment wash over me. This was what family was all about: sharing experiences, laughing together, creating memories. The tension from yesterday felt like a distant memory. After lunch, we piled into the cars and headed into town. The narrow, winding streets were a challenge to navigate, but we eventually found a parking spot and set out to explore on foot. The town was like something out of a postcard: centuries-old buildings, quaint shops, and a beautiful central piazza where locals and tourists mingled. We wandered the streets, popping into churches to admire the frescoes, stopping at a gelateria for ice cream, and browsing shops filled with local crafts. At one point, we climbed to the top of the town's medieval tower, the view of the surrounding countryside taking our breath away. As the afternoon wore on, we found ourselves at a charming little cafe in the piazza. We claimed a table outside, ordering espressos and pastries, watching the world go by. The atmosphere was relaxed and jovial, everyone sharing their favorite moments from the day. It was in this moment of contentment that my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out to see a notification from my bank. A sizable charge had just been processed. My brow furrowed as I tried to recall what it could be for. Then it hit me: the villa. In all the excitement of arriving and settling in, I'd forgotten that I'd put the full payment for our accommodation on my credit card. It was a significant amount, more than I'd initially planned to spend on this trip. I felt a twinge of anxiety. It wasn't that I couldn't afford it, but seeing the number there in black and white made me acutely aware of the financial burden I'd taken on. And unbidden, Sarah's words from yesterday echoed in my mind: "You only serve to pay for things, haha." I must have visibly tensed because Mom looked at me with concern. "Everything okay, honey?" she asked. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just a work email," I lied, not wanting to bring up money issues and potentially ruin the good mood. But as the others returned to their conversation, I found myself unable to fully engage. My mind kept circling back to the charge, to Sarah's words, to the imbalance in our financial contributions to this trip. I tried to shake it off, reminding myself of the conversation Sarah and I had had last night, of the beautiful day we'd just experienced. But the nagging feeling persisted. As we finished our coffees and prepared to head back to the villa, I made a decision. I needed to address this, not just for my own peace of mind, but for the sake of our family dynamics moving forward. Once back at the villa, as everyone dispersed to freshen up before dinner, I retreated to my room. I sat on the bed, phone in hand, my finger hovering over the call button for my bank. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. This wasn't just about the money. It was about setting boundaries, about ensuring that my contributions, financial or otherwise, were appreciated and not taken for granted. With a sense of resolve, I pressed the call button. As the phone began to ring, I felt a mix of anxiety and determination. This was a decisive moment, one that could potentially shift the dynamics of our family vacation and our relationships going forward. "Hello, thank you for calling. How may I assist you today?" The polite voice of the bank representative brought me back to the present. "Hi," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need to discuss a recent charge on my account." As I began to explain the situation, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. This wasn't about canceling the payment entirely. I still wanted to contribute to our family vacation. But I needed to renegotiate the terms to ensure that the financial responsibility was more evenly distributed. The call lasted about 20 minutes. The representative was understanding and helpful, working with me to find a solution that felt fair and manageable. By the end of the call, we had arranged for the charge to be split into smaller, more manageable payments over time, and I had set up alerts to keep better track of my expenses. As I ended the call, I felt a sense of empowerment wash over me. I had taken control of the situation, addressed my concerns, and found a solution that worked for me. It wasn't about backing out of my commitment to the family vacation, but about ensuring that my contribution was on terms that I was comfortable with. I sat there for a moment, letting the implications of what I'd just done sink in. This was more than just a financial decision. It was a statement about my worth, my boundaries, and my role in the family. I wasn't just the one who paid for things. I was an equal member of this family unit with my own needs and limits that deserved respect. A knock on the door jolted me from my thoughts. "Hey," Sarah's voice called out. "We're thinking of starting dinner soon. You want to help chop vegetables?" I smiled to myself. "Be right there," I called back. As I stood up to join my family, I felt lighter, more centered. The decisive call had been more than just a conversation with my bank. It had been a pivotal moment in my personal growth and in my family relationships. I walked downstairs, ready to join in the dinner preparations, to laugh and chat with my family, to continue our Tuscan adventure. But now, I did so with a renewed sense of self, a clearer understanding of my boundaries, and a deeper appreciation for the complex, beautiful, sometimes challenging dynamic of family. The smell of garlic and olive oil was already filling the kitchen as I descended the stairs. The sound of laughter and the clink of wine glasses reached my ears. And as I stepped into the warm, inviting chaos of our family dinner preparation, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, as equals, as partners, as family. The rest of our Tuscan adventure flew by in a whirlwind of sights, sounds, and flavors. We explored ancient hilltop towns, sampled way too much gelato, and took countless photos of sunsets over rolling vineyards. But all too soon, it was our last night in Italy, and we found ourselves back at our villa, packing our suitcases and reminiscing about the trip. As I folded my clothes and tucked away souvenirs, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed over the past week. Not just in terms of the memories we'd made or the places we'd seen, but in how we'd grown as a family and as individuals. The sound of laughter drifted up from downstairs, and I smiled to myself. It was a warm, genuine sound, so different from the tense atmosphere that had marked the beginning of our trip. I zipped up my suitcase and headed down to join the others. In the living room, I found my family gathered around the coffee table, which was covered with photos, ticket stubs, and other mementos from our trip. Mom was trying to organize everything into a scrapbook, while Dad offered helpful, or not so helpful, suggestions. Tim was scrolling through the hundreds of photos on his phone, occasionally showing one to Sarah and Mike, who were curled up together on the couch. "Hey there, stranger," Sarah said as I entered the room. "Finished packing already?" I nodded, settling into an armchair. "Yeah, though I'm not sure how I'm going to fit all the stuff I bought into my carry-on." "Oh, that's easy," Tim piped up. "Just wear all your new clothes at once. You'll look ridiculous, but hey, at least it'll all fit." We all laughed, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest. This was what I'd hoped for when we planned this trip. Easy laughter, shared jokes, the comfort of being with people who knew you better than anyone else. "You know," Mom said, looking up from her scrapbooking, "I think this has been one of the best vacations we've ever had as a family." There were murmurs of agreement from around the room. "Remember when we got lost trying to find that vineyard?" Mike chuckled. "And we ended up at that tiny family-run place instead?" Sarah grinned. "Oh yeah. And the owner was so excited to have American visitors that he gave us a personal tour and way too much wine to taste." "I think my favorite was the cooking class," Dad chimed in. "Though I'm not sure I'll be able to recreate that pasta dish at home." "You can always try, honey," Mom said, patting his hand. "I'm sure it'll be interesting." As we continued to share memories and laugh over the mishaps and triumphs of our trip, I found myself growing quiet, taking it all in. A week ago, I'd been anxious about this vacation, worried about family tensions and old grievances resurfacing. And yes, there had been some bumps along the way. Sarah's comment at the beginning, my own moments of doubt and frustration. But sitting here now, watching my family interact with such ease and affection, I realized that those challenges had ultimately brought us closer together. We'd faced them head-on, had difficult conversations, and come out stronger on the other side. I thought back to the call I'd made to the bank, renegotiating the terms of the villa payment. At the time, It had felt like a big step, a way of asserting my boundaries and ensuring that my contributions were recognized. Now, I saw it as something more, a moment of growth, not just for me, but for all of us. Because in the days that followed that call, I'd noticed subtle shifts in our family dynamic. Sarah had made a point of expressing her appreciation for the things I did, big and small. Mom and Dad had started asking for input from all of us on decisions, rather than just announcing their plans. Even Tim had stepped up, offering to handle more of the day-to-day logistics of our sightseeing. We weren't perfect, of course. We still had our moments of frustration or misunderstanding. But there was a new awareness, a conscious effort to communicate better, to acknowledge each other's feelings and contributions. As the evening wore on and we finished our impromptu scrapbooking session, we decided to have one last dinner on the terrace. We worked together to prepare a simple meal of pasta, fresh tomatoes, and the last of the pecorino cheese we'd bought at the market. Sitting around the table, the warm Tuscan night enveloping us, I looked at each member of my family in turn. Mom and Dad, their faces relaxed and happy, already planning their next adventure. Sarah and Mike, holding hands under the table, lost in their own private world. Tim, for once not on his phone, fully present in the moment. I raised my glass of wine. "I'd like to make a toast," I said, my voice quiet but steady. Everyone turned to look at me, their faces expectant. To family, I began, feeling a lump form in my throat. To new beginnings and old bonds. To facing challenges together and coming out stronger. To love, in all its complicated, messy, beautiful forms. There was a moment of silence as my words sank in. Then, as one, my family raised their glasses. To family, they echoed, and the love in their voices was almost palpable. As we clinked glasses and sipped our wine, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. Yes, tomorrow we'd be leaving this beautiful place, heading back to our regular lives with all their demands and stresses. But we'd be taking something precious with us, a renewed understanding of what it meant to be a family, to support each other, to love each other despite our differences. Later that night, as I lay in bed listening to the gentle sounds of the Tuscan countryside, I reflected on the journey we'd taken, not just the physical journey to Italy, but the emotional one we'd embarked on as a family. We'd started this trip with tension and unspoken grievances. We were ending it with a deeper understanding of each other, a renewed appreciation for our bonds, and a commitment to nurturing our relationships. As I drifted off to sleep, I smiled to myself. Tomorrow, we'd be leaving Tuscany behind, but we'd be taking the most important thing with us, a stronger, more united family. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect Tuscan day to bid farewell to our temporary home. As we loaded our luggage into the rental cars and took one last look at the villa, I felt a mixture of sadness and excitement. Sad to be leaving this beautiful place, but excited for what lay ahead. Our drive to the airport was filled with chatter about future plans, both individual and as a family. There was talk of weekend visits, of regular family dinners, of maybe even another big trip in a year or two. As we waited at our gate, our flight back to reality looming, I took a moment to step away from the group. I found a quiet corner with a view of the runways and took out my phone. Scrolling through the photos from our trip, I was struck by how much happier and more relaxed we all looked in the later pictures compared to the earlier ones. A hand on my shoulder startled me out of my reverie. It was Sarah. "Hey," she said softly. "You okay?" I nodded, smiling at her. "Yeah, just reflecting, I guess." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "It's been quite a week, hasn't it?" "That it has," I agreed. "But a good one, I think." "Definitely," Sarah said. She paused, then added, "I've been thinking about what you said last night in your toast. About family and new beginnings." I turned to face her fully, curious about where she was going with this. "I just wanted to say, I'm glad we had this time together. And I'm sorry again for how things started. But I'm even more grateful for how they ended up." Her voice was soft, sincere. I pulled her into a hug, feeling a rush of affection for my sometimes difficult, always loving sister. "Me too, Sarah. Me too." We rejoined the others just as our flight was called for boarding. As we walked down the jet bridge, I took one last look out the window at the Tuscan landscape. But as I turned back to my family, Mom fussing with her carry-on, Dad double-checking our boarding passes, Tim already settling into his seat and pulling out his headphones, Sarah and Mike bringing up the rear, hands clasped, I realized something important. The real beauty, the real adventure, wasn't in the places we'd seen or the things we'd done. It was right here, in this group of people who drove me crazy sometimes, but who I loved more than anything in the world. As the plane took off, soaring over the Italian countryside, I settled back in my seat with a contented sigh. We were heading home, but in many ways, our journey was just beginning. And I couldn't wait to see where it would take us next. The end of our Tuscan adventure wasn't really an end at all. It was a new beginning, a fresh start for our family. We'd faced our challenges, confronted our issues, and come out stronger on the other side. As the coast of Italy disappeared beneath the clouds, I closed my eyes, a smile playing on my lips. Whatever the future held, I knew one thing for certain: we'd face it together as a family. And really, what more could anyone ask for?